All right, let's get started. Again, I want to welcome everybody to our fourth installment of the Professional Development Webinar Series. My name is Dan Jackson, and alongside me is Arundhati Dandapani, our Chief Editor. Excited to bring you today today's webinar, Storytelling for Data Scientists. And as complex as the amount of data changes, the core concept of storytelling, being able to present it in a persuasive, easily understandable way is going to be very important for the transition of market research in the coming years. What we started out at the newly revamped MRI for this initiative was to create Canadian content, innovative topics like the one we have today, and to support research professionals as the transition of traditional MR to a more diversified sort of skill set, but all the more important now with the challenges with COVID. And just some housekeeping. We do have the CMRP, so the Canadian Certification for Market Research Professionals. It is being revamped, so the exam itself will be released in October. And there's two ways to obtain it. So if you have under 8 years experience, you can write the exam. So it's a combination of short answers and proposal. And then there's an experience pathway where you would have your written account of your experiences and your competencies. Now, to continue the conversation today, so there's a lot of people on today. So we've had around 300 registrants. So if you want to ask any questions that you weren't able to ask, you can go over to the professional forum. We also have a social forum, a breakdown of hopefully some online networking and potentially create your own events, Zoom events, and things like that. Upcoming webinars in August, we have Leadership 360, touching on topics such as trust and leadership, benchmarking, crisis communications. We have automotive diaries. So topics include pre and post-pandemic information around the auto industry in Canada and the world. Entrepreneurship and MR, a lot of people are taking the plunge. It's going to be a really informative session. Big tech, small tech, and future intelligence. So diving right back into the newer methodologies and technologies. And so if you have any questions, you can actually chat and send them to me directly. If you go to in the chat function, there's an option to send it to admin. So if you'd like to send us a question during the event, you'll be able to. And for the recording and the deck itself, you'll get a link after the show, and it'll take you to the online forum. And I want to thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to hand it off to Laura Warren from Storylytics.
Great, thank you, Dan. Thanks for the great background on what's happening with the MRIA. It sounds fantastic. Hi to everyone here on the phone. I am really thrilled to be part of this webinar today. As Dan's already mentioned, my name is Laura Warren, and I am the founder and principal of Storylytics, where our sole focus is on the data storytelling process. So everything that we are going to be talking about today. Very specifically, we teach practitioners such as yourselves how to create compelling stories that will align the teams that you're speaking to and really inspire the change that needs to be had to improve the business. Now, I come to this business as a data analyst and as an insight leader. That's been my career background. And I founded Storylytics to bring the framework that I developed and taught internally for years out to this broader community to help us really capitalize on this information age. Now, today, what I'm really excited to talk to you about is what I believe is the most important hurdle you need to clear in data storytelling. And it's what I call the unspoken contract between storyteller and audience. And I'm going to talk to you about the three truths that you really need to understand about your audience in order to really make an impact with your data. So let's start this conversation with a quick definition of storytelling. So when we talk about storytelling, if we can just move on to our next slide, when we talk about storytelling, be it for entertainment or for analytics, at its essence is the journey from what is to what could be. And it's the tension between those two states that draws us in and tells us a story. In data storytelling, very specifically, that as is state is the problem that the business is trying to either solve or capitalize on, and the could be is the answer or that action that we really need to take to capitalize on the problem. And our data between those 2 points is really what makes up for a data story. Now, I'm sure that many of you on the phone, if you've already done some poking around on data storytelling, you've likely come across this Venn diagram that was originally published in Forbes magazine. Now, I love this Venn because it really does talk about what the 3 major components are for a data story, but I don't actually think it's complete as it's not focused on the end state. So there's no question that when we talk about data storytelling, each of the components of data, narrative, and visual is critically important to building out our story. But without a real understanding of the audience, we kind of run the risk of getting into this, I have the data, put in the chart, have the data, put in the chart, data chart, kind of finish all that up and then put the narrative in. And that's not really a compelling story when we put the narrative last. And certainly that narrative is really about really connecting with the audience. So the risk of working in this vacuum is that we end up with telling stories that are compelling to us, but maybe not to our audience. And that can be frustrating, frankly, on both sides of the table. The stories need to really resonate with audiences because at the end of the day, it needs to hit a set of decision makers who are going to be inspired to take action based on the data that you are sharing because you know where it needs to be able to go. So I talk a lot about audience-centric data storytelling. And the underlying principle of the framework that you'll see next is that all good stories start at the end. Now, if you haven't heard that phrase before, it's a general storytelling practice to kind of say, well, where is the story going so that I know that I can actually build my story to where it needs to be. But it's really true when we start talking about this within the data storytelling space. So as data scientists, we are interrogating our data with the idea of being able to help and answer with where things are going. When we can actually put the ending point at the building out of our story, like what is it that we really want our audience to do, that's when we can actually make sure that we are having that connection with our audience. When we fail to connect, when we have that frustration, that's when our audience can feel that they didn't necessarily get the value that they wanted out of the data. Now, we all know that value is there. It's our job to really be able to make that connection. So when we talk about that unspoken contract, I talk a lot about what I call these audience T's and Q's, or truths and questions. And that's the framework that I'm going to be talking to you about in order to really be able to hit on that contract that we have between storyteller and audience. And what that's really about is what our job is as data storytellers. Our audience, and what we all want out of this, is to be able to align with our audience on what's next to achieve a longer term goal. And you'll see that phrase on the next slide. Again, it's our job to align with our audience on what's next to achieve a longer term goal. So when we think about being able to put good stories at the end, this is what we are trying to achieve. And what that fundamentally means is that what we are trying to be able to do and need to do is to be able to connect with our audience and inspire them. And it is our ability to connect that's really going to be where we can influence and well, frankly, connect with them. And it's our ability to connect to their truths, what is really meaningful to them. And they're at the center of this. And that fundamentally means we need to be able to meet them where they're at. When we talk about inspiring them, that's when we talk about this phrase of insight. We want to inspire through insight. And insight is one of those phrases that gets thrown around a lot. And the phrase that you're going to see next is really how I define what is your audience really looking for when we talk about an insight. And an insight means to them something that they did not already know that is relevant to the problem at hand. So again, when we talk about what's important here, it's important in their eyes and something that they did not already know and find compelling. Not what's super cool to us, because there's so many interesting things that we can look at with the data. We need to keep it focused on what is relevant to them and is new to be able to get to the problem at hand. But the question now becomes, how do you know that? And where are we actually going? And this is really where it comes to being able to overcome this hurdle about really connecting with your audience. And I believe it comes down to these things that I call the 3 truths. And those 3 truths are what I call business, personal, and influencer truths. I'm going to walk you through what each one of these are and the role that they play, but then also what are the questions that you need to be able to know that you have the answers to in order to really know whether you've got it. So very quickly, when we talk about a business truth, this fundamentally is, what is the business trying to do? These are the things that are about what are the objectives for the overall business? What are we trying to achieve? What is our profit margins for the year? What does its brand stand for? All of those types of things. Those are business truths that everybody in the organization will nod to and say, yes, I know that to be true. And when we go into the data, that is what we are trying to solve for. But the issue is that when we are building a story, when we are actually trying to be able to connect with our audience, we need to really be able to understand their personal truths. And when we talk about personal truths, this is really being able to hit on what's already on their mind. Because when audiences come to our stories, they do not come as blank slates. They come with their own personal experiences, they come in with their own personal biases, and they come in with a theory on what is actually already going on. It's part of why they have reached, particularly for decision makers, reached and sit where they are today. So we need to recognize that because they're not coming with a blank slate, those personal biases are what is going to inform what is insightful to them, how we're going to connect with them, and how we actually need to be able to open up them to be willing to what we're going to be telling them. So just to give you an example, I used to work with the Procter & Gamble business, and way back when, a product that is now known as Sunny D, back in the day was known as Sunny Delight and was launched in Canada, call it 20-ish years ago. Situation that I had with them was a business truth that they came to me with, saying, we'd really like to be able to explore some differences, some different locations for a product so that this already successful product can have more eyeball space, more shelf space, and hopefully we can continue to increase our volume. That's great from a business perspective. On the personal side of things, through discussion with them, what I actually learned was that what they really wanted to have was an understanding as to how they were going to be able to get extra shelf space within the refrigerated section. And that's an important distinction because Sunny D, or Sunny Delight, is a shelf-stable product. It was at the time. And them getting into refrigerated space was a huge imperative for them to actually have as a goal. It was not their business goal to get there, but it was certainly a personal truth that they wanted to be able to get to. Understanding that obviously makes a huge difference in terms of how you actually interrogate the data, and would very much be some of the questions that you would ask ahead of time, but it does play a role in the way in which you tell the story. And that's where we would need to connect with them. The final truth is something called an influencer truth. An influencer truth means, what can you do with this once I give you the information? And that is where we kind of move to that act part. So I solve this, I connect with you, and I can show you how you can act to take advantage of your longer term goal. So that's a business, a personal, and an influencer truth. Business truths we solve for, personal truths we are connecting on. And again, just repeat this is where we see insights is on a personal truth. This is where we connect there. And then we talk about an influencer truth, which is where we act. The three key questions that you want to be able to make sure that you have to be able to answer with that is, anytime that you're being asked a question, you are going into the data. It's like, why are we going in here? What are we asking? Why do you ask? And then it is, what theories does the audience have about this? And then a final one is, how is it going to be used? So there's a why, what, and how that you want to be able to understand about your audience at each stage. Each one of those truths is important as you go into the data, but as you build out your story, here's where they actually all fall. When you're actually talking about a business truth, as you engage in your story, as you build out this whole dramatic arc that needs to connect with your business, we always start off by talking about business truths. And you are connecting to what you really want to be able to solve, or confirming what the whole business wants to solve by talking about these business truths. We then move on, once we've all aligned on that point, to really start talking about a personal truth. What were your theories, and how can I meet you where you're at? So if I go back to my Sunny D example, we would start off the conversation by saying, we're here to really be able to talk about how can we find you some new ways to be able to build your presence in the store to increase your volume. I know you're quite interested in being able to understand what we might be able to do within the refrigerated space, and I'm going to tell you about that. but I'm also going to be telling you where I think there's some opportunities outside of the refrigerated section. What we're doing there is acknowledging where they're coming from, meeting them there, giving them the answers they want to hear at that personal level on, does my theory make sense or not in terms of this being a refrigerated section opportunity? And then transitioning from yay or nay in terms of that personal truth to what you really need to hear, which is how I can really help you with this, the business truth. Start with where they are, and then you transition over into knowing about what those business truths are, really delivering on the answer there. And then no story is complete without an action at the end, and that is where you tap into your influencer truths. Where do you have the ability to act? And how can I help you meet that longer term goal? So that whole objective, that whole contract that we have as storytellers in terms of being able to align with our audience on what's next to achieve that longer term goal and connect and inspire really comes from our ability to understand their business, personal, and influencer truths and layer those into the story that we're telling them. Align first on that personal, on the business truth to understand this is where we want to go. Connect with them on the personal truth. Pardon me. We start by aligning on the business truth. Then we connect with them on that influence, on that personal truth to be able to say, I know this is where you want to get to, but let me tell you what you really need to hear. Transition from personal to business truth to get to that real answer, and then close that with that action to be able to help them meet that longer term goal. And it's an action that they have the ability of influence in doing something with. So that is the biggest hurdle that we need to be able to get beyond in terms of really being able to connect with our audience and tell those stories. Now, the rest of my colleagues that are going to be speaking today are going to be giving some more depth in terms of some of those how-tos. I think you're going to get a ton of value out of that. I'm going to transition you to Richard. If anybody has anything else they want to ask me, feel free. But Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much.
Can you all hear me? Dan? Can you all?
Yeah, it's good to go.
Okay, can I move the slide, or are you going to move the slide?
You can move it if you'd like.
Okay, I'll move it. Thank you, Laura, and it's a pleasure here to speak as part of this forum. My name is Richard Boir. I have been a data scientist.
Hi, Richard. Your voice is cracking up. You might want to come back in.
Predictive models for that long. Okay. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
It's coming in now.
Okay, I'll just speak closer. Can everyone? So you can all hear me? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. So I've been building models for the last 30 years, both on the marketing side and credit risk side. So I have my whole career has been in the data science industry. So I'm just hoping to share some of my thoughts with you over the next 10 minutes or so. So when we talk about machine learning, I mean this part of the forum that I'm speaking on is really about demystifying machine learning, which is a phrase that has been used and bandied about for the last 5 years or so. So I just want to provide some context in terms of like what machine learning is. And basically it's a mathematical algorithm that delivers a solution to solve some business or social problem. So here what you're looking at is probably a classic solution. This is the actual solution that's used in what we call logistic regression, which is trying to predict a probability score. Am I still okay, Dan? My audio is still bad?
Yeah, it's going.
Okay. So maybe I'll go slower and speak closer to the computer. So this is a logistic regression model, which is basically outputting a probability score. So this is an example of one machine learning output. Now the different types of machine learning solutions, and I'm just presenting a few of them, are logistic regression, which you just saw on the other slide, which is an actual scoring equation. There's decision trees. There's discriminant analysis. So these are all different types of mathematics. And then on the fourth little box over here is called deep learning, which is really which really represents the fundamental math behind artificial intelligence. So, and this is where a lot of the data science research has been going, is really looking at these techniques and seeing how they can really help us to produce better solutions. Again, just to dive deeper into what machine learning is really an iterative mathematical process. So I like to use this example where what you're essentially doing here is you have an example here of x, and then you have a term over here, 14 minus x to the 1/3. And what you're doing is the computer is actually going to try different versions of x such that x essentially can converge to 14 minus x to the 1/3. And you can see here it tries 1. So x is 1. And you'll notice the term here is 2.35. So the computer says, I'm going to try another version of x. And it tries 2.35, and it's still off. So it keeps trying different versions of x until it eventually converges here. And so this is where the machine is really, and again, this is a simplistic example where the machine is trying to learn through an iterative process. So this is kind of, one example of a machine really trying to learn. The human being is not doing this. The actual machine is doing this. But again, that's machine learning. What I want to talk about is, and Laura talked about this in her presentation to some extent, is I want to talk about the data science discipline. The data science discipline, and Laura talked about this before in her discussion on storytelling, which is she mentioned about problem. Well, here as data scientists, our first thing that we do is really trying to identify what is the problem. What's the problem we're trying to solve? The second thing, and Laura talked about this as well, is the data. How do we organize the data to solve the problem? And once we organize the data in the right way, we can then do our analytics, which may involve modeling, may involve reporting and producing visualization reports. You'll notice over here I have I have a machine learning with an arrow pointing to conducting the analytics. So the machine learning only represents a small component of the entire data science discipline, which is basically the analytics portion. And then the fourth area is basically, and again, Laura talked about this, how am I going to act? How am I going to act on all this information, which gets down into implementation and measurement? So, and again, what I'm going to be talking about, or some of the examples that I'm going to be referring to are consumer behavior. This is where I've spent my 30 years, is basically trying to predict consumer behavior. So consumers will buy.
Hi, Richard. The audio's giving a little bit of a hiccup right now.
Which consumers will we back on?
Yeah, it's back on.
Okay. So what do businesses want is basically, can you explain the algorithm and can you show me how it performs? So if I'm delivering a solution, basically what the business wants is, okay, what's inside the solution that you're building? And number two, more importantly, is how's it going to perform? And so that's what I'm going to try and share with you over the next few slides. But again, this is in the context of consumer behavior, which is where I spent most of my background on. And so again, this is an example of a model. Dan, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Dan?
Yep, it's going good.
Okay, good. So here we have a model that I built. Doesn't matter what type of mathematical technique that I've used. I did use a specific technique, but you can see here in the technique that I used, I can easily explain the attributes of the model, its strength within the overall equation, and its impact on the behavior I'm trying to predict, which is a response. response to a particular campaign. So who's most likely to buy? And so I'm able to explain the importance of each attribute within the model, its contribution within the overall algorithm, and its impact on the behavior that I'm trying to predict. So that talks about model explainability. The next slide talks about performance. So the business people may say, well, that's fine, but how is the model actually performing? And so here I have a slide which actually takes a model, and I'm actually taking a look at 200,000 customers, and I've been able to rank these 200,000 customers based off the model output into deciles. And what I'm able to show is I'm able to show that depending on who I want to target. So if I want to target my top 30% of customers based off the model, I'm actually getting a positive ROI. Once I go below the 30%, so once I start to target customers that have scores, below in the bottom 70%, or let's say, the bottom 60%, I'm actually getting a negative ROI. So what I'm able to demonstrate very clearly here is the actual performance of the model, and it's the actual profitability or return on investment. And again, I can compare models by looking at how these models are rank ordering. So you'll notice here response rate, 3.53, 2.75. If I have a better model, what I expect to see is actually rank ordering in terms of getting even more differentiation of response rate from top to bottom. And these response rates actually represent observed, not predicted. So this is based off a validation sample where I'm actually taking a look at how a model would have actually performed. Now, another view, this is looking at a decile chart. So I'm trying to move quickly because I know there are other speakers here. But the next way that to the next slide, I can't. Oh, never mind. The next slide is a different perspective. This set here, I built a claim risk model, and here I'm trying to predict the likelihood of somebody having a claim. And what you're looking at here is observed claims. So if I have no learning, basically I have a line up here, this gray line, which means that at 10% of my top 10% of my policies, I'm only able to account for 10% of losses. 20% of policies, I'm able to account for 20% of all my losses. You'll notice this red line is what the client's already doing, and here, what this is saying at my top 20%, given the existing client solution, I'm actually getting 27% of all the losses. So my top 20%, I'm accounting for maybe 30%. The green line actually represents a model that we built, and it's saying that my top 30% of policies ranked by this model, I'm able to account for roughly 60% of all the claim losses. So data scientists can actually look at these lines, these parabolas, and see and compare different models. So you can see here, this green line actually represents a much more powerful way in terms of trying to identify claim losses. And you'll see these kinds of charts used in a lot of the textbooks that are out there. But again, I'm showing you both types of charts. One, this is the AUC curve. The one previous to that you saw, I'll just go back to the previous one, is what we call a decile or gains charts. And they're both equally important in trying to demonstrate the performance of models and actually to compare them over time. My final thoughts are, and I know I've really rushed through this. I do a 2-day course on data science, and I've done this for a number of years. I do a number of overseas seminars on this, so I get quite down deep. So it's always a challenge for me to really summarize something in 10 minutes. But nevertheless, machine learning is not new. Most of these techniques have been in existence for decades. Okay, for decades. One final thought I want to leave you with, some of this may be new to a lot of you. Explainability and performance are key to success. So you need to explain what you're doing. So if you're doing a model or some kind of an algorithm, explainability is important. And that is one of the current challenges with deep learning techniques. And performance is critical, okay? And machine learning is really only one element amongst the many elements within the data science discipline that are critical to success. As you can, most data scientists spend close to 90, and I repeat, 90% of their time organizing or creating what I call that analytical file, which is a deep learning component. So, and any data scientist worth of salt is going to certainly reinforce or support that notion that it does primarily reside with the data that you're working with, particularly on the consumer behavior side. When you go into other areas like image recognition and text, it's less so because that type of data is already organized in a much more pristine way. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Susan, and we'll go from there. Over to you, Susan.
All right. Hi. Thanks so much. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, coming in loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. So hi, thanks everyone for joining the talk today. And we had some really great talks from Laura and Richard that covers a lot of ground already. I'm really excited to be here. My name's Susan, and I'm a data scientist at Clearbank, which is the largest e-commerce investor in the world. I previously worked as a data scientist in telecom, and I've delivered data science products to millions of users. So today I'm going to share a story about how I use data science storytelling to communicate with people in all types of roles and in all parts of the business. Last year, I spoke at a conference where there was a mix of data scientists, developers, and people from the business side. It was a fairly even mix, but I would definitely say that the conference was targeted a bit more towards the technical folks. And the talks were full of math or, complicated neural network architecture, graphs, stuff like that. And I gave my talk, which did have some deeper dive into the theory as well, which is what you see on the slide with some technical jargon that you can see on the slide. But afterwards, multiple people on the business side, like campaign managers and marketing directors, they mentioned to me that they could actually follow my talk through and through. So 1 full year later, someone from HR that had attended this talk mentioned to me again how they found my talk memorable, even though there was all this technical detail, and how it made them understand and care about how these technical details matter. And this was the complete opposite of what they had expected attending such a technical conference. And I bring this up because of the impact we can have on the business as data scientists and the influence that we can have, but only if we can make stakeholders and the business understand and care, right? We're in this together. So if there's no animation here, it's a picture from the movie Inception, which is about a guy who steals information from his targets by entering their dreams. And he goes deeper and deeper into these dream levels where the more juicy information is located, right? So here in this picture, they're free falling into the water to enter one layer deeper in the target's dream. So see, this is one of the keys about data science communication. Imagine I had just said the movie Inception and I didn't provide the context. This would have alienated half the audience already for those who haven't seen the movie or maybe forgotten the storyline. It's the same with data science and communications with data science, right? Like just dropping the names of algorithms, giving no context that does not help the audience. Context needs to be explicitly given, not assumed, which often could cause a breakdown of communication. So let's hold on to that idea. So I will go into 3 levels of data science storytelling. This is the first level, which is why should the audience care? This is how I preface that technical jargon in the talk that I gave, which you saw on the first slide, right? So the main idea is that Spotify, YouTube, and Netflix recommend you shows or videos that similar users watch, like how a friend who knows your tastes and has similar tastes would. So let's say my friend knows I like Inception, maybe she'll recommend me some other movies by the same director, right? But this can be done automatically with data science and machine learning. So I just mentioned Netflix, YouTube, Spotify, which are services that you've likely used or heard of before. You might have heard of the YouTube algorithm, quote unquote. And this is an explanation of what is going on beneath the algorithms. This was the topic of the talk that I gave last year that I've been mentioning. And why is this important to, let's say, our company or the client's company or the audience's company to do this as well, right? We have to make them understand as a data scientist giving a presentation. It saves the business time to recommend these things automatically, right? It saves the user's time for not having to sift through the huge amount of information, which reduces the overload and it increases user engagement. So this is an example I was using during the talk that the audience can relate to, and it helps click in their mind. They might think, hey, I have dealt with this type of data science product before when I'm using YouTube, right? And it really has saved me time. So this will be convenient to our company too, as a attendee of the conference, right? And of course, this is one example that I've been using throughout this talk so far, but you can swap it with any sort of data science concept or any sort of data science product. So now we enter the second level of data science storytelling, right? How do we recommend similar items to you on YouTube, Spotify, or Netflix? And why should we do it too, right? Shows can be recommended by finding similar users, as mentioned in the first level. And what makes a user similar to you, right? If they have a lot of overlapping viewed shows with you, which means they've seen similar shows, have similar tastes. And if you put them into rows and you put the movies or shows as columns, we can start to use mathematical methods and machine learning techniques to find this out automatically. So level 2 is bridging the context. We try to bridge the context from level 1 to a more abstract concepts. And to be fair, this really depends on the audience and the presentations. Sometimes only the first level is enough. But many execs I've worked with, they're curious and they want to learn at least a bit of the technical detail because they really want to understand the pros and cons of machine learning. So it's not just relying on something mysterious, right? It helps them to make better decisions for the company if they can understand. So I need to take them to deeper levels, like level 2. So here on this graphic, if we have a data set representation of each user and how much they like each item, imagine this looks like an Excel spreadsheet with each row. It has all the users on your website, and each column is like a movie or a show that they have watched and enjoy. And the cells are filled with the scores, like 4 out of 5 stars or nothing if they have not seen this movie or show before. And from here on, I've been bridging the level 1 context to a more abstract form. And this is starting to get to a place where I can go into that third layer, which is introducing the mathematical concepts or more technical jargon, right? So now in this final level, level 3, we have this kind of gibberish, probably to the HR or marketing campaign director. This is complete gibberish. Alternating least squares algorithm, blah, 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 using matrix decomposition, blah, 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 etc. right? But we can get into this jargon because I have already bridged it from level 1, level 2. And this is where I started explaining the more mathematical details that you saw on the first slide. And remember how 1 year later, people mentioned that they could remember it, right? What's important is the context that led us here and going down level by level, not skipping directly here and assuming that people understand whether they are technical people or not, right? Even people in data science have their own specialization. Some might specialize in this kind of technique. Some might specialize in more like language, natural language processing, or other types of techniques. So they need this context too. And in addition, remember to remind the audience what this jargon is here to do, right? We're still just trying to solve that problem of recommending the right items or videos to the user at the right time. That's all this is doing. This helps make it more like less overwhelming to the audience and less intimidating. And by tying in the jargon with the reason why this is great for the users and for the business, the information can stay for a long time in the audience's mind. So the how and the why are still important, though it is also important to help the business owners or the stakeholders understand these details. So just as a summary, level 1 is used to connect the understanding of a data science use case, algorithm, or results to the audience's real life experience. And level 2, it's possible to go deeper to, especially when the stakeholders want to have a deeper understanding, right? Because of the responsibilities involved with using data science and AI, machine learning to help them with due diligence as well. As a data scientist, we can start to bring them deeper by bridging level 1 context to more abstract or technical aspects. So now we get to the last level, which is probably the only place jargon exists and should exist, but don't get lost in explaining the terms, even if the audience is more technical, right? Remember to connect it back to the previous levels and the why this is useful to the business and what these technical concepts are doing. So there we have it, the 3 levels of complexity for data science storytelling and communication. And if you take away anything, is to go from high to low levels in a sequential manner and take the audience with you, right? Remember that context must be provided and never assumed. So thank you, and I hope that the 3 levels framework can help you with your data science storytelling. And now I hand over the floor to Robert, who will be presenting next. It's all yours.
Thanks, Susan. That was great. So as I mentioned, my name is Rob Vogge, and I'm the lead data scientist at Phase 5. And today I'm going to share with you a framework that we use within our organization for telling effective database stories. And hopefully you can use that in your organization and leverage some great change. So just as a bit of high-level background, Phase 5 is a full-service market insights firm, and we focus on helping our clients put the customer at the center of all of their decisions. And that runs all the way from product ideation through customer care and retention. And so our data analytics and data science practice will support our customers or our clients as needed. It's a very flexible tool wherever they're at within that process. And so that to say that as a consultant, we exist to influence systemic change within our partners' organizations. And so our goal is always to be communicating with the problem owner. So oftentimes our direct client or our direct interactions are with research managers or technical teams, but ultimately in the end, we want our work to be used by the people who ultimately commission the project, the people who are pulling the levers within the organization to drive change. And so, to that end, we recognize that people in that role care very much about the work we're doing. They are certainly capable of understanding the nuts and bolts of the work that we do, but oftentimes they don't have the time to go deep into the work that we've done for them. And so we try to be guided by 3 rules in our communication. And that's that we are highly visual, easily comprehensible, and solution focused. And so building off of that last point, we always try to remember that all of our analyses exist to solve problems. So interesting findings are nice, but no one pays us for those. So always trying to, again, think back to that problem owner and what problem are they trying to solve. So those are sort of the big picture rules that we use or that are guiding our data storytelling, but we wrap those around a much larger framework called the hero's journey. Right? And if you are familiar with literature or even just movies, you'll know that the hero's journey is a centuries-old framework for storytelling. And at its heart, there's a hero. And that hero has a problem, and that problem has dire consequences associated with it. They can't just leave it or something bad will happen. So to solve that, they need a guide. And that guide gives them a plan or some sort of solution. Then they exhort them to action. Right? And from that action, that results in some sort of conflict that either results in success or failure for the hero. So if you want to think of a modern example, Star Wars is a great one, right? Luke is the hero. The problem is his internal struggle with the Force, as well as the rebellion that's going on. And he needs Yoda, right? So Yoda gives him a plan moving forward to turn into a Jedi, and the struggle that ensues makes for the rest of the original trilogy, at least. So if you're looking for a way to apply this, or a great resource for applying this in a business context, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller is a great resource. And so within his recommendations, and sort of in alignment with those recommendations, we build our framework with the idea in mind always that our client is the hero. Right? Our client is always the hero, and we are the guide. And there are certainly some temptations and perils within our own journey to communicating in this way, and that is to put ourselves as the hero, or the data that we have as the hero, or potentially our analysis. So with that very brief summary of the hero's journey, I'd like to show you a case study of how this might unfold, and an example of how you might use it within your organization. So what I'm going to show you is a fictitious example from we've placed it within the banking industry. But the idea here is that I'm going to show you the high-level executive summary. So all of our reports include very technical details, detailed appendices, but thinking again to that high-level problem owner, how do we want to place them within the hero's journey? And so what you'll see here is we begin by setting up our hero, right? All of our clients are doing great work. They are fighting the good fight, and they are trying to make the world better in their respective fields. And so we're very explicit about that. We sort of introduce them. But they do have a problem. And in this instance, the problem is that they're not able to identify the segments of their prospects. So in this example, the client has a great segmentation framework, but they cannot target their acquisition efforts because they don't know what segments their prospects are falling into. And ultimately, this has some dire consequences. They can't just leave it alone. They're wasting campaign dollars, right, and ad dollars. Client attrition is an issue, and an inability to increase lifetime value of their clients is also an issue. And so with the stage of the problem set, we introduce ourselves briefly as the guide. And so for the problem owner, a lot of times they don't always know who we are because we get contracted sort of lower down in the chain of command. So we like to introduce ourselves and just say, you know, this is who we are and this is where we fit within this engagement. And then we start with the plan. And from a data science perspective, it helps to break the plan into 2 parts, the methodology and the results. And so what we're always thinking when we're presenting these details, right, because the methodology and results are fairly detailed, is we want them to trust that plan enough so that when we exhort them to action, they feel confident that they can live out the rest of this hero's journey and be successful. And so here you see a very high level but very visual example of what a methodology might look like with building a predictive model. And then we continue on with our plan with the findings. And so here you can see Again, adhering to our principles of highly visual, easily comprehensible, problem-focused, a summary of not just the performance of the model on the left, but also some of the drivers so that they can understand what's going on under the hood with that model. And so our goal there, again, is to give them enough information that they can trust that they'll be successful when we give them our exhortation, which is the final step. And so we are always looking to do this, right? This is where change happens, is in our recommendations. And so within this particular problem, there is a short-term solution, but a longer-term struggle that this client has to face. And so we let them know that they can go forward with deploying the model today and that they'll experience a great benefit. But that in this instance, again, a fictitious one, there's some data quality issues, and that how they address those data quality issues going forward will ultimately determine the outcome of this hero's journey. And so again, our goal in this last step is always to give them confidence that they can go on through the rest of the journey and ultimately achieve their success, their desired successful state. And so just as a brief summary, again, we at Phase 5, we operate under these sort of larger storytelling principles of keeping in mind that all of our analyses exist to solve a problem, right? And to that end, we are trying to be highly visual, easily comprehensible, and solution-focused in all of our communications. And the bigger sort of skeleton that underlies our storytelling is the hero's journey. And it's a great framework. It's not the only framework out there, but it's certainly a good one. And it involves a hero who should be your or our client, their problem, which has some peril associated with some serious consequences if they don't address it. And then we present our solution, which are our analyses. That's our path forward. And then from that trustworthy path, we set up an exhortation, which are the next steps from which they can go on and live the rest of that journey successfully. And so with that, with our 5 minutes left, I will turn the floor over to Dan. Oh, I should say, this is my contact information. If you'd like to reach out, please feel free to. But I will now hand the floor over to Dan for any questions that you might have.
Thanks a lot. Really interesting. Everybody had their own perspective on storytelling, and I think hopefully everybody got as much as they could out of today, even considering some of the technical issues. But all in all, great. If anybody has a question, please send it in the chat. And we have a few that were sent to me, so if you can send it to private. This one's for Richard. It's from Kevin. It says, how have Canadians' attitudes to and the comprehension of data science changed over time? Okay. Can you hear me, Richard?
I missed that. Yeah. I just want to repeat it. You just.
Yeah. It was how have Canadians' attitudes toward in the comprehension of data science changed over the last few years or over time as a whole?
I would say they've changed quite dramatically. I remember 20 years ago trying to explain what a correlation analysis was. Now, more and more, I would even say the business people will actually understand, not necessarily the math behind a correlation analysis, but what's the real business deliverable behind a correlation analysis. And you saw to some extent Susan was alluding to it in her presentation, but that's, we've seen changes in that. Marketers, the other thing is marketers are becoming much more numbers driven, whereas in the past it was much more on the creative content, and they were less numbers driven. So we are seeing a lot of changes, and quite frankly, anybody that wants to become a chief marketing officer has to be numbers driven and will work closely with data scientists.
Excellent, thanks for that. This one is for Robert. It's from Lee. What are client companies these days more likely to do for their data science solutions? Is they to hire a team in-house or work with consultants or full stack agencies?
That's a great question, Dan. And I actually just got a private question from Rebecca Kennedy as well. So I don't know if you want me to take that after I answer the one you just mentioned. But we're seeing more people move to an outsourcing of data work simply for the fact that resources are thin, especially within insights departments. So I think one of the big pushes for most of our clients is to move from traditional research to analytics-based research, simply for the fact that the traditional research is expensive. When you're going out and doing surveys, you have to pay for incentives and things like that. And so the question comes, how can we be more efficient and use our internal data to answer some of these questions? And so that's typically how we've been approached, and we've been seeing a little bit more of that recently. But again, that's within the insight space. So within, if I were working in banking or something, or on a more focused data science track, that I'm not sure what that might look like. Dan, did you want me to answer Rebecca's question as well?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. So Rebecca says, hi, Rebecca. What are examples of treating the client like the hero as opposed to treating ourselves like the hero? I'll try to think of a specific example, but I can safely say that when we are communicating and all we're talking about are the analyses themselves, we've probably veered off track, right? It's certainly tempting to focus on the numbers that we've created, or even the methodology that we've come up with, which oftentimes in our role is a tailor-made solution. But when we are, I don't know if I can give you a specific example, but I can give you a litmus test. Is that if the percentage of your summaries that are focusing on the numbers and the work you've done is substantially greater than the problem that it will help solve and how, then we've probably veered into the land of making something other than our client the hero.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that. Laura, this one's from Erica. Are you with us, Laura?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Great. So this question is, how can small budget boutique traditional MR companies adopt and benefit from data science storytelling?
Adopt and benefit from data storytelling. Okay, so first of all, I would say that any market research organization, particularly those of the boutique, the way that you could really differentiate yourself is by putting the audience at the center and being able to make sure that, just as Robert's been talking about, in terms of being able to engage and bring the hero forward, really putting that audience members first, your client first. It's really being able to make sure that you can make that connection between the two. And the more that you can put that storytelling into play, the bigger differentiator you'll be. And I think you probably already know that, just kind of given that question. But in terms of the how, a lot of it really comes down to, I'm struggling to think about how to answer this in like 30 seconds or less, but what it's really going to come down to is being able to get to that clear message of why this insight matters to your client and how it is going to help them further their business strategy. So what are we going to do next as a result of what this is? So why did we do this research for you? What is the key information that you really need to be able to get out of it? Why you should care, what this really matters to you in terms of your business, and then what do we think you can actually capitalize on as a result of it? So I hope that helps in terms of what it is. It's really kind of talking about what is the outcome that your client is really trying to get to, and how are you getting there. There's a whole process that kind of goes around it, but there is certainly the benefit in terms of where that is.
Thanks, Laura. This one's for Susan. Say I am looking for a job as a data scientist in a bank. Just if you are looking for a data science job, what kind of stories should I be telling the hiring team about myself?
Right. I think that's a good question. Recently I've been doing some mentoring calls with, I guess, job seekers, and one common thread, one common piece of advice I've been giving in this situation is that kind of to stand out or to communicate. And you mentioned, your interest is in the banking sector, then it's good in an interview to bring up, hey, like I'm wondering what your team is doing, and you kind of brainstorm what the team might be doing, right? Because it's common in banking for data science teams to work on either, let's say, segmentation or like customer journey or risk. Like all these things can be found online. And let's say in telecom, they might be working a lot on customer churn, which is like predicting when people might leave from, let's say, Bell to Rogers, right? And this happens in the banks too, right? But if you can kind of Google that and find something that is a project that you think they might be working on, but let's say this team doesn't do churn, right? They do like credit risk predictions, right? You can get that conversation going and really show that you're interested in the industry by finding out the specific types of questions that they work on, right? Not just kind of go in and say, oh, I'm really good at such and such technique, but not showing that you are knowledgeable about what they are applying it to, because what you would apply it to in telecom would be different from banking or finance or other types of tech as well. And this really stands out in the interviews, like whether candidates do it or don't, right? It's like when I was in telecom, there were interviews where I guess it seemed like they weren't really clear on what they think data science would be used for in telecom at all. And, it makes a difference if you can show that you understand. So this would apply for banking.
Thanks a lot. Now, this one's to any one of the panel. Feel free to speak up if you have an answer on the tip of your tongue. In a brave new world of market research design, companies with data science solutions are being seen as those that are kind of recession-proof themselves. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I'll jump in. It's Richard.
Yeah.
I would say that certainly, over the span of the last few decades, that our field of data science is just grown exponentially, and that's because of the value. Like those of us that were early practitioners were able to demonstrate the huge dollar impact of data science. So it is somewhat recession-proofed in that the end deliverable, and we've been talking about this today, is about what does it mean to the business? Well, it means, what we've been able to demonstrate is the huge dollar impact to businesses. And that's why, all the big organizations have many data scientists, sometimes 2 or 3 different departments. And so, that's, being able to use data, and especially in today's age where we're becoming more and more data driven and there's more and more data all around us, it's just accelerating that need for the data scientists. So I teach up here in Canada at a couple of colleges, and those that have those skills, those tech skills to begin with, most of them have the tech skills and they're going to try and learn the business skills. They're getting those interviews because of the demand and need.
Excellent. Okay, we'd love to get to every question. We're running out of time, so I want to give a big thank you to Richard, Robert, Susan, and Laura today. And continue the conversation. We'll be sending you a link with more information on our next coming webinars, but also to take part online with if you have any questions you weren't able to ask or anything related to today's talk. But I want to thank everybody, and have yourself a great week, and reach out when you can.